Hi, I'm Reverend Wendy Craig-Purcell here at the Unity Center in San Diego. Thank you so much for watching today. If you'd like to support the work that we do here, please consider making a contribution. Go to our website. It's easy to do. Thank you in advance for that contribution.
First of all, I have to begin by saying and expressing my sincere appreciation and gratitude that you are sitting here right now. It means so very much to me, and quite honestly, I'm delighted and I'm surprised when we had this idea in one of our recent BCT meetings that maybe we should do a town hall and just share with the congregation some of what's been going on behind the scenes. The team felt it was a good idea, but we had no idea how many people would actually come. We know how precious our time is, and we know that there may be all different sorts of experiences and feelings around this very broad topic of racism. And so we just didn't know what to expect. And you just are feeding my heart and soul for being here. So I thank you for that. And so the purpose of our time together today is to just share with you kind of where we have evolved from and where we are today. And we want to keep that as kind of as brief as we can, because most of all, we want to make sure that you have the opportunity to ask any questions that you have, to share any thoughts or feelings or concerns or appreciation that you might have. So I'm going to introduce our members of BCT who are going to speak to you briefly in just a moment. And then I have a story that I want to share with you, and something I want to show you on the screen very quickly. And then you'll hear from John Jenkins, and from Lisa McClendon, and from Jimmer Bolden, and from Christine Elliott. And so the work that we have been doing that is now being called Braver Conversations Together began formally in the church a few years ago. But where it really, 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 really began was with a conversation, and a conversation that happened in a very natural and comfortable and yet somewhat unexpected place and way. And it was a conversation between Jimmer and myself and our son Jonathan and our daughter Jennifer and John and Jimmer's wife JC. But the main conversation began with Jimmer, myself, and Jonathan. Jimmer and his family and my family have become close friends over the years. And it didn't start out that way. Jimmer was a fabulous singer. But over the years, we became close friends. And that included spending time together skiing. We love to ski. And so we had been enjoying time together, our families skiing and staying in our family cabin for quite a number of years. And I share that because I want you to have a feeling for how long we were genuinely friends before we ever got into a conversation about race. Now looking back at that, I can appreciate from perhaps Jimmer's perspective, but certainly from my own, how odd that really was. Thinking that just because we're friends doesn't mean that I know what I might need to know about race. And so what had happened is we started to ask questions. And that led to information that I personally had never had before. And that information, which was shared by Jimmer in that very natural, comfortable family kind of gathering, was mind-blowing to me, but also it broke my heart. And I found myself asking deeply, how could I not know this? And how could I not, in my love and friendship of Jimmer, have never even thought to open up this topic? And probably the reason to not open it up was both ignorance and awkwardness. Like, how do you talk about this to somebody you're already really very good friends with? So I'd like you to tell the story of what happened. And we've said there are a couple versions of this story. Over years now, they've kind of evolved a bit. But it is a true story. So I'm going to leave it to Jimmer to tell the story.
Yeah, and both versions are good. And they both seem like they're true. No, they're actually true. So again, with the topic came up, and it might have been Jonathan who raised it. But I said, it's really a challenge when you have the feeling that I have when I drove to work and I realized I didn't have my wallet. And I kind of got a little panicky. And, that's kind of Wendy and Jonathan didn't really understand why. And I said, well, if I don't have my ID, if I get stopped by the police, life can take on a whole new dimension given the state of policing in the U.S., in America at this time. And I actually called my wife and said, hey, you got to bring my wallet to me, because I don't live that far from where I work. And she's like, well, why is it a big deal? And I said, you don't understand. And she got it. Soon as she thought of what she said, she got it. And, it's that if I get stopped and I don't have my ID, I now have nothing to prevent a police officer who wants to make trouble with me or who doesn't like me to now take me to the police station. Once that happens and you're in the process, now who knows what can happen, right? We've seen these kinds of things happen because now we have video camera. We're seeing video cameras. We've seen much more of this, but that is why. And Wendy and Jonathan really didn't get that. They didn't really understand because you don't have your license. You just say, hey, I forgot my license. Okay, here's a fix-it ticket. Just send, pay it by such and such a time. So I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
So just that bit of information, and I also remember you sharing the story of being in the South and the same thing happening, being on a business trip and leaving the hotel without the wallet and realizing the potential dangerous situation you may have put yourself in. So hearing these stories, we then started to ask lots of questions, and we wondered, how is it that we live in completely different universes and we didn't even really know? And how is it that I don't even give a second thought to something like that, and yet here's somebody I've known for years, I love, I know who he is. How is he living in such a very different world than I am? And so we started to say, tell us more. And I'm embarrassed to say that it was the first time as a white woman I had ever heard about the talk. Does everybody know? And it's okay if you don't. Who doesn't know the talk? Thank you for being vulnerable and honest about that. I'd never heard about the talk. And Jimmer started to educate us about the talk. And of course, as I'm hearing this from my friend, and my son is sitting there with me, I'm thinking, again, this is two completely different universes. I've never had to have the talk with my son. Would you say what the talk is?
Yeah, it's not about sex.
Oh. I didn't even go there.
You can breathe deeply now. It's not about that.
Okay, did anybody else think that's what the talk was? No? Okay. I love you. You're so much fun.
Thank you. So the talk is, when you get older, particularly if you're a black male, that your parents, one or more of your parents, will tell you, if you're stopped by the police, you keep your hands on the steering wheel. You say, yes, sir, no, sir. You present them with the identification, whatever they want. You don't say anything else. That is it. No matter how they treat you, you don't say anything else. Because if you do, you have now given them a premise to decide they're going to escalate to a certain level. You have to have that talk because it can happen. And the reason that you don't know about this is because you don't have to know. This doesn't present in your world.
That's right.
Right? And it's the same thing with most white people. It doesn't occur because you don't have the issue in a majority white country of being confronted by someone who makes a judgment about you before they talk to you, just by walking down the street and seeing you now. And we all have these biases. But the one with race is so visceral because you can immediately detect it. You may not like older people, but you don't dislike all older people. You may not like younger people. You don't dislike all younger people. You may not you may think that women have their certain place in society, but it may not be all women, and it's not something you viscerally react to. But because of the history of slavery and the slave trade and civil rights, et cetera, in this country, there can be a visceral reaction just by seeing. You don't know if somebody is gay or LGBTQ by seeing them necessarily. But when I see a black person, particularly a black male, I immediately start, the society has put an image in my head, and the news continues to put an image in our head that most black men are not to be trusted. And I've seen this walking down the street wearing a suit and tie, and a white woman I'm passing holds her purse closer. Like, no, I'm the one that's gonna help you if something happens. So you don't see, and so she doesn't know that about me because she's made a judgment based on that. And so that, people say, why are you talking about race? So much about racism. It's always about racism. And to me, it's the core of how we look at each other and we separate ourselves from each other. Whatever the ism happens to be. But race is so visceral, that's a great place to start. But the core of it is about how we're feeling like we're different or separate from someone.
So that experience led to ongoing conversations, and then on my part, ongoing desire to educate myself and try to understand. So I did a lot of reading and a lot of studying and so forth to try to get better educated. Most of you, I think, have this timeline that I prepared. This was actually prepared because I did a training of some of our Unity ministers who learned of the work that we were doing here, who wanted some sort of a context and a timeline. I'm not going to bore you by going through every single aspect of it, but I wanted you to at least have a little bit of a context for where and why and how the work continued from the conversation that began with Jimmer many, many years ago now. And so you see that in a more official way here in San Diego and in the church, that in the summer of 2017, we showed the movie White Like Me. And that was a big deal for us. We wound up showing it twice. The first time we showed it, we had well over 100 people in attendance, and we invited people to stay for a Q&A. And almost 80 or 90% of the people stayed, not for Q&A actually, for dialogue based on what they were learning from that particular movie. Other New Thought churches in San Diego had heard about what we had done and wanted to know how we had the courage to step out and do this kind of work in the church. And that kind of confused me, why they would think it would take courage to show a documentary and provide people an opportunity to have a conversation. That led the area New Thought ministers and regional and national New Thought ministers to say, let's all show this same movie around the country at the same time in our communities and encourage our congregations to have conversations about unconscious bias and what really is unearned privilege and what is systemic racism and what are all of these different pieces that most of us as white people have never had, as Jimmer will say, you never had a reason to know. So that was where our work kind of officially began. It evolved then to me having this idea that maybe I should invite some of our Black and African American members in our church, and I picked that group rather than just expanding it to any group of people of color because I needed it to be a small group of people. And I could identify our Black and African American members and invite them. And so we began meeting in my home once a month it was supposed to be about 2 hours, but we were usually together almost 4 hours, having conversation with me simply asking our members, our Black and African members, tell me what's going on for you now in your lives around racism in the world that we're living in today. I learned so much, and I felt so privileged to be able to learn and to understand better. And I think the group also had an opportunity to be very vulnerable and very real with each other in those gatherings. And when we finished, I didn't have any curriculum, so I really didn't know what we were doing, but we met once a month for 6 months in conversation. And at the end of that, I thought, well, now we bring together our white people and our black people, and we're all happy ever after together at the Unity Center. Excuse me, and it was Tanya who said, no, you need to bring all your white people together and sit and have conversations about race, just like you did with us. And I remember saying, then I'm going to blame you, because I can't imagine standing in front of the congregation saying, I need all you white people to come and join me in my house to talk about race, when I'm trying to, see us be together. But she was actually absolutely right. And I had another African-American New Thought minister tell me the same thing. She said, you got to bring the white folks together. So some of you may have been here that Sunday that I said, calling all white people. And then I kind of interviewed and chose, and there was a group of white people that met in my home. Stand up if you were part of the White Allies Group 1 or 2. Please stand up. I want to acknowledge you. What you don't know is all total, there have been 60 people involved behind the scenes, from the first group with our black members to the 2 white allies groups. And the 2 white allies groups also met from once a month for about 3 or 4 hours, learning and studying for 6 months together, trying to educate ourselves and understand things. And then a second group met. So the first group met last year from January through June, and the second group from July through December. So this is some, and there's more of this on here you can read for yourself, the behind the scenes things that we've been doing. So then when both of those 2 white allies groups finished, we invited David Campt, a renowned, what do we call him? Pardon me? A facilitator and dialogue person on, he's created a program called the Race Method, and it's about dismantling racism one conversation at a time. We brought him to the Unity Center to do some training and workshop. And when that was over, I think that was in November, doesn't matter when it was. When that was over, I remember leaving church that Sunday, and Lisa and Kathy, it was Lisa and Bobby and Lorraine, who were in the courtyard saying, okay, we got to do something now. We got to get to work. But we know that you, Wendy, can't do it all by yourself. We got to get to work. So let's form a team. And that's how the Braver Conversations Together team formed, to decide what can we start doing together. So I'm going to be quiet now, and I'm going to ask each of the Braver Conversation team members to first share with you, and they will be much briefer than I was, where, how, and why this work lives in them. And then we'll open it up to conversation. So where, how, and why does the work that we've been doing, JJ, live in you?
Well, for many years I've told a joke about I've worked hard to get this white. I'm not giving it up without a fight. But in this context, it takes on a very different meaning. That context was usually about my avoiding the sun because I burn so readily, right? This is a very different thing because, as Jimmer explained, I have benefited enormously from unearned white privilege. I've never once had to have the thought, if I'm pulled over and don't have my ID, there might be trouble. Never had to have the thought. I've never been discriminated against or felt prejudice. They just were not in my awareness. And even though Jimmer said we didn't have to be aware, and Dr. Bobby Atkinson has said the same thing, I don't believe ignorance is an excuse. I think our culture is waking up finally to this issue, and I believe it's us white folk who have to do the heavy lifting to end systemic racism. What you'll find, I thought the GI Bill was for every returning soldier from World War II. My father benefited from it. I did not know that even though black members of the armed forces could apply for the GI Bill, they still couldn't get into the best schools. They still couldn't buy in certain neighborhoods, even though they might be able to get a loan, through something called redlining, where they would not make loans in these areas for people of color. All of those kinds of things I didn't have to think about. They were simply out of my awareness. But I've become very aware through the activities now at the Unity Center, through reading White Like Me, and the additional resources that the White Allies and the Braver Conversations team has been working on, that there is a lot of work to do.
One of the things that you all have said to me again and again, in one form or another, is we're not looking for white people to feel guilty or blamed or ashamed. That it's really, what I've walked away with is a vulnerable, honest sharing and an education so that we know more than what we've known before. And when we know more and understand more, we will begin to automatically think and act differently. It's an automatic piece. Why are you still here? How does this live in you? You started all this. You and Jonathan and...
Well, yeah, I was going to turn this on.
We're recording.
Thank you.
You can hold this.
Okay.
I'll take this.
Okay. So just to kind of piggyback on what Wendy was saying about guilt, is that imagine it's been 400 years. So I don't mean to exclude other people of color, because certainly that same visual identification sets up a stereotype in everybody's mind, regardless of race. I mean, it happens with black people. Seeing certain black people, they'll get a stereotype because that's what's been programmed into all of us. So it's not about that, but it's been 400 years. I mean, 4 centuries. It's been 60 years since the civil rights movement. And still, we're now just having a conversation about this in the last few years. And that's why there's this unknowing, this barrier. That's why white people don't know. So I think we should all take a collective breath. Don't let the guilt constrain you. Step out and ask questions. And something I learned 20 years ago, I think, which made it possible for me to acknowledge and see my then-to-be wife as someone who I never would have been interested in dating, was doing a workshop where the facilitator always said, just be aware. Don't have to do anything. Just be aware. And the awareness will not let you do nothing to make changes about whatever it is in your life. And it's just about being aware. It's, the understanding, imagine what it feels like to daily have to fit in, as Lisa was saying. I have to make, so I was explaining, using this example of, I work in a business where it's almost all white people and almost all male. When I go to a meeting or when I go to a conference, I do like Lisa says, you got to assess, okay, who's there? I got to identify, this person is that, this person is that, because black people know a lot more about white people than white people know about black people, because we've had to live in your world, right? If we want to get ahead, we have to find our way in there. That means I have to present a certain way that I know is acceptable. So I have to size up everybody, size up the room. How many people of color are there? Women, men, okay, he's the big boss, okay. And guide, work my way through that situation so that I don't miss an opportunity. Not because I'm me and because I may be smart about something or I may be experienced, but because I don't want someone to hold something against me that limits my opportunities. Think about having to fit in every day. And most of you have probably heard the term being a credit to your race. We have to act a certain way so that the next person that comes along, if you had a dim view of African-American people, you might say, hey, that Jimmer, he wasn't so bad. Let me give this person a chance. You had to be a credit to your race so that we could all rise. But again, I come back to the fact, the core of it is the fact that we're separating ourselves from each other by feeling like we're different from each other, and we know way different. We know way, way better than that.
So and I'm going to wrap my part up here really, really fast. I get this mic is starting to fade. One of the things that I've walked away with from the groups that we've had is the power of conversation and vulnerability. Just to be willing to be aware and to have a conversation. And I remember sharing in each of the White Allies groups, if you have a friend who is a person of color, and you have never had the conversation with them and asked them, how are things for you now racially in your life? If you've never had that conversation, you are missing a huge opportunity to really get closer in your friendship with that person. And in that invitation and asking some of our white members, if you do have a person of color who is a friend, to have that conversation, there was, in each case, a discomfort of, well, yeah, no, I haven't ever had the conversation, and I have to think about it. But to a person, eventually, they did have the conversation, just like you did with your friend, just like we wound up having with you. The work of BCT now has been meeting for several months and planning activities for the broader congregation, because we realize we can't expect people to devote hours every single month for months on end to do some of the work that we've done. But we do want to make available some of the work that we've done, and we want to make it fun and informative and engaging. And so we have a whole schedule that we are laying out for 2020 that will include movies that we may show, followed by a chance for deep and real conversation. We have a trip planned to the Museum of Man again to tour the exhibit on race. We are encouraging our members to, and will provide the opportunity and some instruction to sit with a person of color and have a deep, honest, vulnerable conversation both ways. We're looking at what we might do that might involve the La Jolla Playhouse and theater and acting on stage, where we can act out or have acted out by professionals, vignettes that we can then respond to and educate ourselves. So you will be hearing, my point is, you will be hearing of many activities that will be made available to you if you want to participate. We'll need help, and so if you have interest in helping, we want you to do that. I realize that this part has gone much longer than we thought it was going to, and I don't want to keep you here forever, but I do want to we want to hear from you. You obviously cared enough to come. There are 85 or more of you here. So what is on your mind? What do you want to tell us or ask us? And if I can have a couple people run mics, that would be great. Will you run a mic? And we do want you to speak into the mic, because I asked Christian, thank you for doing this on the spur of the moment. I thought we just might want to capture this, and I don't know why, but so we're filming. So make sure you speak.
I was moved by the fact that when you walk into the room, you have to size it up. And so as a white person, and I do work with people of color and interfaith and cultural, what for you would be the best thing for me to do if I see there's one or two black people in the room? Should I go up and bring them to my chair, introduce them, or is that just like jumping overboard too much? What should I do?
I'm not a black person, so I can't answer that.
So she's going to hand it to a black person that can. Actually, I think it's just a matter of inclusion, right? I mean, you don't have to go up to somebody and go, oh, I know you're black, you're probably feeling uncomfortable. I'm going to make you a little bit more uncomfortable. Inclusion, and, if you have the opportunity, talk to them. Exactly what Wendy said, have the conversation if you can. You may have to ease into it differently, but just be aware that there is that level of uncomfortableness personally, I have mostly overcome that. It depends on what type of room it is, but I've mostly, overcome that. But sure, if you're, afterwards, feel free to come up and talk to somebody and just, make them feel more welcome.
Other questions? Oh, wow. I'm going to rely on you guys to run mics. And just speak real loud and be real concise if you can.
I'm Gary Hogue. I was with the first White Allies group and happy to do that. And what I'm happy and want to thank Wendy and all of you for doing today is bringing everybody together so that we can take the next step. A lot of us were wondering. We were from January through August last year meeting at Wendy's house where you all learned a lot. We were with 2 or 3 sessions with Dr. Camp. So for me personally, I'm just happy that we're moving forward with the next step. So thank you very much for letting us know that we are going to be doing that.
You're welcome, Gary. While the mic is being passed, what I want you to know is while our work is focused a little bit more on black-white, the work of BCT is going to be looking at all of racism, not just black, white. I mean, there's anti-Semitism that's happening and escalating now. There's our Latino friends, so it's not going to be just zeroed in, but we had to start somewhere, and this is where we started.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So I like things to start small. I really appreciate this forum today because it gives me a better understanding of what this is all about. And I think that there's a component of seek to understand that's really important for me, and I think most people. And I went to the Talk Not the Saturday workshop that the gentleman had about dismantling racism, and it was very good. But for me, smaller comes a little closer. And so I wonder if perhaps at the movie or the other things that you're considering doing throughout the year, if it would be possible to have someone who's actually got a story or an experience of being, questioned by the police, different things like that, because I think when we start with something like that, it actually taps a nerve and gives us a more open mind to listen to the next thing that's going to happen. The other thing that for me would probably resonate a little stronger is a big group I think is very good, but small groups for me works better. And I wonder if sometime in the future, you might want to consider breaking this into smaller groups with a leadership of maybe someone in the White Ally group, so that we could actually have those deeper conversations with a smaller group of people where we don't feel so invisible and maybe we're more willing to share and be open.
That's perfect because Dr. Michael and Lorraine Mahoney from the BCT group are all about that, creating opportunities for very close, real conversations in a very intimate setting. So you will be hearing more about that.
Hi, thank you. I'm actually not a congregant here. I'm a guest here today, but I came to the conversation because I really appreciate what you're doing. And I'm a member of the local community of color activist community. And what I wanted to say was I like the idea that you're going to be widening the conversation to include more people of color, because as you mentioned, racism is a national problem. It's not a binary problem.
That's right.
So I think one way to be able to do that and really facilitate that would be to include another member to your team that maybe isn't African American or white, because like people of color have said today, when you walk into a room, you count the other people of color, but you also count the people of color in leadership. So looking at the stage and seeing that white people are still dominating a conversation on anti-racism in the community is a little upsetting for people of color. There are 5 of you up there. If you added one more person or a few more people who were from other racial groups, maybe that would expand the scope of conversation and understanding a little further. Also, I think it would make it less of a binary, because racism isn't a binary, it's not black and white, and that's what anti-racist work helps to do, is to make people realize that it's a spectrum of humanity.
Thank you for that.
Okay. So part of the things that we're talking about, you're like right on the path of what. Okay, part of the things that we're talking about, and I'll stand up. You're like right exactly what part of what we've been talking about. Closer to the mic? Okay, got to eat the mic. Okay, so one of the things that that our particular group is talking about is creating an environment for people to act out different scenarios. The goal of this is that as you have two people that are acting out, we have an initiator, a narrator that would stop and cut and begin to talk to the audience and ask them, what do you think about this particular situation? And then how would you answer? And what we're doing is allowing that person that thinks that they have an idea to come and interact, and then they would interact so that they can learn how a person would respond and how they can deal with these issues. The goal of this is to give people an environment where they can think out what's happening and how people feel. Now, it's not just for white and black, because we've been talking about that whole thing. It's also about the Asian community, the Muslim community, women, homosexuals, Jewish community, every single different racial group of people. We have a human problem. You are right on the point. It is not a thing that's just black and white. We've been really messed up to one another for multiple millennia. I mean, think about the Hutus and the Tutsis, the North Korean, South Korean, the Irish, the Scottish. We can't get along with each other, so we have a problem in our human interaction with one another about how to treat one another. We've got to do better as humans for the next generation so that we can learn to work together. And the last point I'm going to make is that if we can get over our separating each other, just think how much of the rights that we can protect for people in this country. One of the things that have happened with racism, the only thing that it was used to do is to separate this group of people so that we can take advantage of them economically, and then we'll make these people feel like they're better, and we'll have them help us to fight against this group of people so we can make them less so that we can make more money. We've got to stop that all across the board, because if that continues to happen, we as Americans will continue to lose our rights. So this is important for us to work in unity with one another, regardless of our race, as Americans.
So in the interest of time, I'm going to push a pause button. I'll let us go another 10 or 15 minutes. I'm going to ask those of you that already know you have a question to please stand and line up in the aisle, and it will make our mic runners a little bit easier, okay?
Good afternoon. I'm Barry. My vision.
Mary, really close. No.
Barry,
Yeah.
you got that? I'm Barry. My vision is love thy neighbor as thyself. Now, if we drop all of the other things that are being discussed here, that's the only thing that's left, is love thy neighbor as thyself. And so what you're doing here is you're opening an educational forum for everybody to learn what has been going on with the biases that we were taught as we were raised. If you can extend what you're doing, I think you're blessed doing what you're doing, but if you can extend this to the third grade, the fourth grade, the fifth grade, the sixth grade.
We're working on that too.
It will all disappear. We will not, right now, the word racism is a barrier to loving thy neighbor. If you can drop all of the things that have been done by our society, we'll have peace throughout the world because we will love our neighbor as ourselves.
Amen.
Amen.
I love all people. The unspoken talk we were given when we were growing up is not to bring home a black date, not to ever date a black person. I remember when the first black person moved into our neighborhood and how difficult it was for people. I just want to say, I appreciate the response you gave to the woman about just being inclusive. What you had said before is just ask. Ask people about their experience. And when it comes to people from other countries, I do it all the time because I'm absolutely curious about other people's lives. But it's uncomfortable. I just don't know the answer to how do you ask a black person, because that not only acknowledges that you think that they're different, that you think it's different, but also it involves a lot of shame, because I know a lot about how black people were treated. There's a lot of, I don't know how you can just say, well, what was your experience with, and making them feel like you don't think they're separate.
I think one of the things to do, a very easy lead-in, is say, hey, at our church, we're having this discussion about race. And I have this question because I don't know. And I have a feeling you know. You know what I'm saying? It's don't make it such a big deal that, again, I think bringing the guilt and shame to it. Like, people thought President Obama was going to take it out on white folks. For all the stuff you've been doing. Oh yeah, he's going to give everything to black people. No, that's not how it works. So I think setting a stage, say, hey, we're discussing this in church. Our church is trying to work through issues of race, and I have a question, and this is what it is. And you just have to kind of go from there. It's going to be uncomfortable. It's been 400 years. It's been, and we're now just talking about it. So it's going to be uncomfortable, but it got better. It got easier. There was more understanding. There was more awareness. I know why I feel like I feel. You ask the question, well, why are black people so poor? Well, do you understand that it was against the law for us to read. You could be killed for teaching me to read. Okay? It was against the law for us to own property. And we know that the way to build wealth is through property. You pass it up through the generations. Well, black people couldn't do that. Why? We're shuttled into these areas where we can live that don't have the services. There's reasons. And I'm not saying black people can be let off the hook for not standing up and saying, hey, we need to take control of our destiny. But when we do, we are chastised for it. We're put down. Why are black people so angry?
I wonder why you're not angrier.
Yeah. And you know what I say? I said this in the cafeteria a couple months ago. White folks, please stop letting other people convince you that something is wrong with me. We just get tired of it. It's just like, some days I just like say, white folks, geez. Oh. No, I'm making light of it, but it's true. You get, there's information behind that, all of that. It's going to be uncomfortable, but it gets easier because as the universe grows of what the bigger it grows and the better it gets. Thank you for asking that, though.
I think what we will do, and not tomorrow, but we will try to make available a list of the materials that the White Allies did listen to and read. So for any of you who want to know how we educated ourselves, and by no means are we experts and we don't hold ourselves in that way at all, but to a person in the White Allies group, we're a lot smarter than we were before. And would that be helpful if we put out for you somebody remind me of that. Would you remind me of that?
Hello, my name is Glenn Clark. I'm new to the congregation. I came last week, was the first time.
Welcome.
Next to my fiance back there. Just very quickly, I was going to say to the woman who was talking to you a moment ago, is like, if I come up to you, I'm not going to ask you, what's your sex life? I haven't met the person. Get to know the person first, like you would any other situation. And as you get to know people, you're more comfortable asking questions of them. But I'm just going to come up to him, just ask him something personal about his life or his experiences without getting to know who that person is and feeling that there's something reciprocating to allow me to do so. The other thing I want to say is that if you look at me, you see an African American, but my heritage is also Latin. Tu hablas español. My family's from Panama. Okay. So my family is multicultural. We have Latin. My aunt was a famous, well-known judge in California, and her husband was Jewish. You talking about guilt? She was Catholic and he was Jewish, and when I went over, it was like I got it from both ends. I grew up in that environment, so I grew up in a Jamaican, Panamanian, Catholic, Marine environment. You're talking about being put into a box and don't want to come out of it. But because of the multiculturalism in my family, we've got Portuguese in our family. We've got, I can tell you all sorts of stuff, and I can add to the stories that both of you talked about. So the biggest thing I wanted to say is that try not to judge the book by the cover. Because again, when you look at me, you see Black or African American. But I can go into a Latin community very easily and converse. So look at the person that you're talking to and not try to put them in a box, in a group. I always teach my children, base the character of the person on the person you're talking to. One of the things you mentioned was when we act up as an individual Black person, we take it for the whole race.
Yeah.
When a white person acts up, it's not for the whole race, that's an individual person. Right. Again, these are generalities. But when we talk to each other, let's talk to each other on a one-on-one basis and base it on that. And that's how I think we grow.
Thank you. Okay. And welcome. Really close to your mouth, like it's an ice cream cone.
Hi, my name is Marina, and I agree with everything that has been said, and there is a lot of great ideas. But my comment first is to tell the Black people, please don't think anymore when you walk in the room to look for other people like you. I think you are more than welcome in most of the places that you will be going. I'm not addressing the problems with, the government and the education and when you are rejected, but I'm pretty sure that in most of the places that you walk in, not to have that concern of how you're going to be received, it will facilitate the interaction. And, that's just what I want to contribute today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next. These last, and then we're going to end. Okay?
So this is for Lisa and Jimmer, so thanks for sharing your story. And so this question is based on discussions I've had with my Black friends, and so I want to get your guys' kind of take on this experience. So just kind of a generalization, racism also presents itself differently based on where you're at. So in the South, it's more overt from what I'm hearing. Here in California, which is of course what I care about, it may be more hidden in there. And I guess, have you guys experienced that? And then what, of course, I'm more caring about California. What's your guys' thoughts on handling that kind of, how to overcome that, basically?
So, yes, absolutely. It's more, I've found personally, that it's more hidden here in California. I raised my son in Dayton, Ohio, which is a very conservative, predominant white. And it was way more obvious. I could tell by walking past somebody, on the street that they had no interest in, getting to know me or being anywhere around me. I think that we as Californians are much more open, but I have been in situations where I've thought at least once or twice, kind of certain that person is just not really into sitting next to a Black person, but he or she's doing it because it's the right thing to do, right? So I can say I would absolutely agree with you. Yeah, I think it's a little less dominant here in the West Coast, but that's my personal experience.
Yeah, I've found that if you get outside the cities in California, you will find it's very conservative and can be very racist. And that is the case in a lot of places. I grew up in Western New York, and a small town near Buffalo, 70 miles from Buffalo. And in all these small towns, I mean, it wasn't as overt, but you still had people who were racist, You have Black folks who go to the South who say, You know, at least I know where I stand. I'd prefer to live here because I know what people are feeling about me, right? And I can deal a lot easier because I know I've got the playing field all laid out. But that's the experience I found. Certainly in cities and certainly in California generally, certainly in the North generally, you'll find more allies. But I look at Pennsylvania, near where I grew up. It's above the Mason-Dixon line, but it's Pittsburgh on the west and Philadelphia on the east. And as many have heard this, it's Alabama in the middle. I mean, it really is. So but it's changing. It really is changing. When you had people in Pennsylvania, small town Pennsylvania, not just voting for President Obama, but stumping for him. I can tell you, that's different, very different.
Two things. Firstly, loved the message today for the previous service. It was great. One comment was when, in the year 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. And we all chuckled because we were like, yes, that's awful and a total fabrication. So what I do for my day job is I work for the American Heart Association on a project that's funded by the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. And we recently created an Indigenous Peoples Day toolkit that is available. I can share the link with you, but it's a wonderful resource for you to share either with your children or grandchildren's school. It has a variety of resources that can be used in the classroom, in your own community, to educate more people about the Native American experience. So it's a great resource that's available. And then secondly, I just so appreciate that we are having this conversation. I've been coming to Unity for about 3 years. And when these conversations started, I really wasn't sure where I fit in. My sister Dina and I are multiracial. We're Mexican, Filipino, German, Irish, Scottish, right? Most of our family speaks Tagalog and Spanish or German. And my husband's Vietnamese and Chinese who speaks Chinese. It's kind of like the UN. It's great. But when we started having these conversations, I just didn't know exactly where I would fit in. And I've been doing a lot of health equity work. And recently, this just all really hit home. My sister lives in Hidden Meadows, and she has a lot of social justice type of bumper stickers on her car. And this is only a conversation that her and I have had, but she was recently run off the road. Wow. And the person was ramming her car and got out and started screaming racial epithets at her. And she got on the phone and called 911. The police officer came, and even though there was all of this information that this was a hate crime and the person was acting absolutely crazy, the white officer said, I don't really see a problem here. Your car is kind of old. It has some dents on it anyway, and completely just waved it on. You're probably fine. It's probably less than $500 damaged. You're done. Like, just move on. And my sister and I had this conversation, but she didn't tell our parents. She's like, if you tell dad, he's just going to freak out. Our parents are going to be so mad. But it's like, these things happen in San Diego. These things happen here every day. And the fact that we're expanding this conversation now, if you're looking for people to sign up and volunteer from the other, racially affected communities, sign us up. We're here to help. And thanks for expanding. Yeah.
Okay.
Last ones.
Okay. My name is Bryn Daniels, and I just want to give another perspective from a Black person of my experience. As you know, we're all different. We have different way of handling things. So I want you to realize that we're not just one. We're all individual. I personally, from the time I was very young, I just loved everybody. It didn't matter what race they were or anything. However, I felt extremely unprotected and unsafe in the world. And what I found for myself, as I grew up and went into the workforce, I normally was about one of the few Black people in the group. So the way I dealt with it was I built a protective wall around myself to the point that I didn't look outside of myself for validation from anybody. It was strictly, I found it within myself to be validated. However, it caused me to appear to be different than I was because it could come off a little differently. But at this point, I'm for protection. I don't take anything personally, and I don't look outside of myself for validation. I am very happy to see us all come together and try and work it out. I don't think it's the best way to handle it, but it's the way I've handled it. And I just thought it'd be a good idea to express that I feel it, I handle it differently. Okay?
Thank you, Ren.
Who out there right now, for maybe the two black members, who out there right now in another nation, another country, somewhere else, who's doing this correctly? How did they get there? And how much ahead are they? Do we have somebody out there that we can use as a mirror or somebody that we should be looking at saying, these folks have done it right, maybe we should aspire and not try and reinvent the wheel on some of this. It's going to take us a long time to get through whatever we're getting. I don't know who's out there that's doing it correctly, so maybe nobody is, but who's ahead of doing what we're talking about out there in the world that you all would use as a role model maybe?
I don't know. We have a very specific history in this country. You know, and it's very complex. You know, for one thing, that there's discrimination amongst black people based on skin tone. You all may not see that. But that was set up during the times of slavery, when the master would have sex with slaves, female slaves, and have these children who were lighter skinned. Now, they were still slaves, but they were called the house niggers. They could work in the house because they were, you know, hey, you have to admit, mixing of the races, whatever it happens, the combination happens to produce some really beautiful people, you know? And as George Carlin said, you know, I believe we should all just bank each other, you know, until everybody's the same color. I look forward to that day too. You know, so you know, and people with darker skin were discriminated against differently. You're going to work in the field because you can take the sun, you know, because you have darker skin. And these beautiful lighter skinned people, they can work inside and wait on us. So there's complexities in the black community. What your hair looks like, how nappy your hair is, or how good your hair is. As my mother's friend used to say, if you have hair, it's your hair, it's good, no matter what it is. So I don't know if there's any specific situation. I know there's a lot more going on in this country, and that's one of the things that David had expressed, and there's more going on than we see on the news. There's a lot more going on than what we see on the news, because this is not necessarily a popular topic. One of the things that, who was talking about, is the issue of working, Tanya, working together. You know, this whole slavery was set up as an economic system, right? Hey, I can immediately identify these people. I can put those in a group. I can make those people work. We can get rich, blah, blah, blah. Okay, I'm going to tell these white working people, hey, you see those people took your job. Oh, okay, we're going to take care of them. So you need to police those people. No, you gave my job to them for free. And now you want me to be the police of this group. So again, you start to see the complexities. There's so many things that we've discussed during this period, the complexities that come up. I don't know. We certainly have these kinds of situations happening because of immigration in other countries, in Europe. Very difficult situations in Germany. I don't know if anybody else is doing this work, but it's certainly a great question. It'd certainly be nice to find out if that's happening, and as we grow, to export the work that we're doing.
But I just want you all to know that in all of the groups that we've had, Braver Conversations, the Two White Allies groups, We often refer to Wendy as our fearless leader. And I would just like to give her a round of applause because this would not be possible if she didn't do what it is.
Thank you.
Wasn't letting you get out of here with that.
Thank you for that. So please continue to check in terms of whatever information we put out of what we're doing, what BCT is doing. If you have an interest of being more involved, please let us know that. If you have questions, please share those questions. Spread the word as well. I mean, if you know people who care about this topic and this issue, let them know what we're doing. Know that we do not put ourselves out here as experts. We kind of stumbled into this very organically and innocently. And where I'd like to leave it is with a couple of very quick places, with the encouragement that what we've already done together today matters. That we've just sat here and we've listened and we've been present and we've been real is helpful.